All right. Hello, I am Amy Weber, and I am joined by Jennifer Volpe. And we are two of the therapists at Speak, Learn, and Play. Speak, Learn, and Play, if you aren't familiar, is a multidisciplinary pediatric therapy practice located in Brooklyn. We have social skills groups, we have speech therapy, we have mental health therapy, we have occupational therapy, and one of the things that we really love to do is all get together and talk about child development and common child development problems or bumps from all different angles from each of our different disciplines. So today we are going to talk about how to set your child up for success. And we're going to really focus on kids who are neurodivergent, kids with ADHD, autism, learning disabilities, anxiety, trauma. So that's sort of the population that we're focused on. But I think that these are things that apply to all kids as we're thinking about setting kids up for success in a new school year. Do you have anything to add to that, Jen?
No, that was well done.
Thank you. So I will start from a mental health perspective. How do we set kids up for success? And I think coming out of the pandemic, especially mental health, children's mental health has really been in the spotlight for a lot of kids and families and in the media. So what does that actually look like? And before we dive into supporting your child's mental health in the new school year, I want to talk about when you should worry, because this is the time of year when kids are going to start to, or your parents are going to start to get calls about their kids. Your kid is doing this behavior, your kid is doing X, Y, and Z, or your kid is going to start to report some things about school to you. So when do you worry? When is it just complaining? When is it just venting? And when is it time to worry? So the common behaviors that parents report or that teachers report are typically trouble sleeping, changes in appetite, hyperactivity, excessive anxiety, school refusal, big meltdowns at home or at school, withdrawing from family or friends or preferred activities, kind of isolating themselves a little bit more, and irritability. I would say those are the big ones that parents become aware of, that teachers start reporting. So when do you worry about this? I would say that I look for changes that are persistent and chronic. And you know your child best. Your child's teacher is just meeting them for the first time. You know your child best. So if you know that they are always a little bit busy and have trouble sitting in their seat, and the teacher starts reporting, oh, they're having trouble sitting in their seat, I wouldn't say that's necessarily something to worry about, because that's something that they're always having. That's not a significant change. This is something that it typically happens for them. Sitting is hard for them. If they've always been a great sleeper and suddenly for 2 or 3 weeks, they're not sleeping, they're up in the middle of the night, they're coming into your bed, and that's a change and it's happening over 2, 3, 4 weeks, then I would say, yeah, that's something's up. That's a reason to be concerned. So I would say that that's what we typically are looking for. That that we want to notice, this is a significant change for my kid. This is not something that's ever been reported to me before. Nobody has ever said this to me about my kid before. I've never noticed this about my kid before. And this is going on now for a while. So, how do you set your child up for success with those things in mind? I would say the first thing to do, and this is advice that you will read on the internet all the time, um, is establish routines, right? I would take that a little bit of a step further and say, establish those routines with your child. A lot of times we come up with a routine, we come up with the place where the homework is going to be done, we come up with the place where they're going to put all their permission slips. And it's not something that is instinctual to our kids. It's instinctual to us. So then they don't follow through because it wasn't part of they weren't a part of the routine. So I would really, think about who your child is and then think about what you think, what routine is going to work for you, and then talk to your kid. Is this a routine that's going to work for both of us? And make the routine with your kid. And that goes for the morning routine, the evening routine, the bedtime routine, the homework routine, everything. I would ask your kid what worked for them well in the past, is what's working for them well now, what isn't working well for them now, and really come up with solutions together as opposed to you sort of single-handedly saying, okay, this is going to be our new schedule going forward. And it might not be a schedule that works for your kid or a routine that works for your kid. Um, the second thing I would really emphasize, and I think this is really the most important thing, is play. School is not a time of play. Even preschool now is really, they're in circle time a lot longer. They're not doing as much free play as they did certainly when I went to preschool. So, as your kid gets older and goes up in grades, these are, play becomes less and less. They have 20 minutes for recess. They might have a little choice time once a week. It's not going to be significant. And all kids need time to play. Play is how they manage stress, it's how they process their emotions, and it is the most important thing that they will do during the day. So when they get home, they do need built-in time to play. And that's going to look different for lots of different kids. It might for some kids it's going to be I'm in front of a screen. I'm on video games for a little while. For some kids, it's going to be having a play date with a peer. For some kids, it's going to be going in their room and chilling out and drawing or playing. For some kids, they're going to want to connect with you and play something with you. You've got to make time for that. I think that is that's more important than homework. I'm sorry, teachers. It's more important than the bath time routine. It's more important than anything else is that time to connect and that time to play. Um, and it'll help you feel more connected and relaxed with your kid also. So it has a double benefit. So establishing routines with your child, playing. My number 3 tip is listening. And that is really hard for us, I would say, because we as adults have so much life experience and we can tell kids how it's going to happen or how it's going to turn out or what they should do, and kids don't need to hear that. And I mean, sometimes they might ask us for advice and then we should give it freely, but mostly what they're looking for is to be heard and understood. And that means really listening and empathizing and labeling the feelings that you hear are coming up without trying to give the advice, without trying to solve the problem. Super important to just give them 10 or 20 minutes of time to just say, and then this happened, and then that happened, and I was so lonely, and then this happened, and can you believe she said that? Just listening to that, all of those feelings, all of those emotions, all of that process that's coming out without trying to solve the problem, without correcting, without giving advice, just listening. And the last thing I would suggest is connecting to your child's school support team. That is teachers, that's support staff, that's any therapists that your kid might have. I would suggest sending not just emails when you notice something is awful and oh my God, what's going on? I would send regular emails of like, this is what we're noticing at home, or this is something new that happened today, or My kid said this word for the first time, or, they had a great play date with so and so. Thanks for that recommendation. So, anytime you can reach out with positive news or sharing or asking questions, teachers will really appreciate that. And then it also creates the relationship ahead of the times that you're going to need to say, hey, you know what? My kid is refusing to go to school and they've been out for the last 3 days. What can we do? How can we get them back into school? You want to develop that relationship and connection with all of the support people involved with your child so that they can get to know you, so that you can get to know them and build that trust. So, with all of that said, I will turn it over to Jen, who will talk about setting your child up for success for from a speech and language perspective.
Yeah. It's not much different than it is from the mental health perspective, but what I like to focus on too is like the communication piece of it and how you communicate with your kids and how you communicate with teachers. I did have to laugh though when Amy was talking about the teachers calling about wiggly behavior. That is my son. I am waiting for that email because it's something that happens every year. He just can't sit still. So, and that's okay. We work it out. But yeah, Amy talked originally about when is it time to worry in terms of behavioral changes, but also thinking about what's happening if school is starting to become too hard, right? So if you need to start worrying about, being able to process information? Are they having difficulties learning to read? And some of those things that you might see consistently, procrastination when it comes to having to sit down and do homework, refusing to read books, a heavy reliance on graphic novels and picture books, which by the way, I think are amazing and they should absolutely be in your child's repertoire, but just like a refusal to read anything that does not have pictures. Yeah, just like fighting homework, rushing through homework, rushing through tests. Sometimes it's easier just get the hard stuff over with and then you don't have to process it and think and work hard. And then what should you do if those things happen? Well, of course, your first line of defense is always the teacher, but you also have if your child hasn't already or doesn't already have some services or language services, sometimes for, kids who have maybe more subtle processing or maybe on the spectrum and have really, great head for facts, but are missing some of that nuanced language. It doesn't really come out until third or fourth grade when the expectations are changing. So you may not have speech on your IEP, but yet there may be some processing stuff. So talking to your teacher, asking your school to set up an evaluation are great first steps. But if your child already has speech and or any service, one thing that I like to do, even with my own first grader, is review the IEP together. So no, I do not take out the document for my first grader, but, I will talk about, oh, you're going to see Miss So-and-so today. That's your speech teacher, or you're going to see Miss So-and-so. That's your sets teacher. Here's what they want you to work on. Here's what we're working on. And this is sort of what mommy and daddy can try and help you do at home. So we know sometimes like remembering your sounds is a little tricky. So one thing that we want you to do is be able to, blend some of these words by the end of the year. Like that's just what we're working towards. And then if you have older children, uh, I think there's a lot of power in being an advocate for yourself and kids learning to advocate and kids learning and understanding why sometimes their school day looks different than their friends. There's sort of power in knowledge in that way. Amy touched on this a little bit, but meeting with your child's teacher, I usually send an email at the beginning of the year and say, my son is Lucas and, he has an IEP and, here are the things that we are concerned about. Here are the things that worked really well last year. Here are the things that didn't work so well. This year, ironically, I didn't have to do that. Our teacher actually sent a form that had strengths and weaknesses and asked basically all the same things that I would have put in an email. So I was sort of thrilled that she was doing that for all of her kids. But yeah, I mean, I usually wait until a week or two once things start to settle down. we are lucky we get to go to the classroom on Friday. Some they have family Fridays. So we get to build a connection with the teacher that way. I only do pick up 1 day a week. So, I try to make a connection with the teacher then, just to have, again, that open line of communication. And then again, like kind of checking in every couple weeks, like this is what we've noticed. This is what he's doing really well, or he really loves science. How can I bring some of that into my home? A lot of parents will say, I don't know what's going on at school. I don't know what's happening. I asked my kid how his day is and he says it's fine, it's good, but I don't really get any information, and they're piecing it from other parents and the classroom chat. So what I started doing was asking smaller questions or more specific questions. It's too much for some of our kids to have to review their whole day and then tell you something that they liked. I mean, they're tired. They've been keeping it together all day. So I usually tell me, what is the most fun thing you did today? Sometimes it's eating lunch. Okay. But then I'll be like, oh, what did you like about your lunch? Who did you sit next to? And yes, it's a lot of questioning, but what I find is it eventually leads to more information. So, oh, and then I went to the playground and I played with Charlie, and so I get a lot of information that way, but I also get a lot of information by asking, well, what was the worst thing that happened today? Because sometimes, especially for our kids, there are things that really are not easy about school, and it should be okay to talk about those things. And, even with my own son, we've gotten into a habit where like he'll be like, everything was bad except for one thing. And then, but we start talking and we start counting. Well, all right, tell me all the terrible things. And then there's like four. And I'm like, well, tell me all the fun things. And then there's like seven. It's like, okay. So, and helping them sort of see that perception, can really change, how they feel about school, how they talk about school, and also practice communicating their ideas, communicating their feelings in sort of a non-judgmental way. As long as you're using all of Amy's just listening to your kid tips, really listening and not jumping in. I live that. It's really hard. And then the last thing I would say is celebrating achievements, no matter how small. I have a very good friend, and she puts on her family calendar that says, we take all wins here. And that really resonated with me. So, even in my home, even with some of my students, when I'm like, what did you like about school? And they tell me something great, I'm like, that's a win. That's huge. Right. Even if the rest of the day wasn't great. So we're starting to do that too. And it's just a way to build confidence and to feel fun and a little bit lighter, because they're going to be in school for a really long time, and we want to make sure that we can pick out the positive pieces for our kids. And hopefully you have supportive staff and supportive teachers. That is not always the case. And when it's not the case, it is certainly something we can talk more about. You can email us and we can sort of help you with sort of navigating what happens when you don't have a receptive teacher or staff, or it's just there's a mismatch in personalities. It's neither one is good or bad. It's just a mismatch. But yeah, so I think that we had a couple of write-in questions for people who couldn't make the live webinar. They did submit some questions. And I think, Jacqueline, if you want to give us one.
Okay. What should I do if I have concerns about my child's IEP? For example, my child has time and a half. How can I make sure that those accommodations are being met?
I think
I
that's a great
think
question.
it's such a good question, and it's so important because the reality is that your teachers are going to have your child's IEP, and they are not necessarily going to have read it by the first day of school, by the first week of school, by the first month of school. And sometimes that's on purpose. Sometimes teachers want to get to know kids themselves before they read a document about them or some reports about them. And sometimes it's just because they're overwhelmed and they haven't had a chance. And I think this goes back to Jen's point about reviewing the IEP or the 504 plan with your child in advance, and saying, hey, remember that you're supposed to have extra time. Remember that you're supposed to be in a separate location. And that's only going to go so far because kids are going to have their own feelings about, oh, I don't need extra time, or I don't need to be in a separate location, or, I don't need that. But that's a first place to start is by really encouraging, like reminding your kid what they're entitled to, and reminding them how they should ask for that. And then I would also just, not in an accusatory way, but shoot the teacher a little email that says, hey, just a reminder that my kid has this accommodation. I want to set him up for success. What will it look like? Will they go in a separate room? Will they, so asking about how the teacher is planning to accommodate feels a little less of puts the teacher on less of the defensive, because now it's like, oh, we're partnering together and you're going to prep your kid for what's coming, as opposed to you're accusing me of not accommodating your kid. And it sets a different tone. So you want to just like, hey, what is this going to look like? So I can prepare my kid.
Yeah.
Anything
I,
to add, Jen?
No, I think even sometimes, asking about a specific assignment or a specific test, you say, hey, listen, we're just trying to monitor because the separate location and the extra time, sometimes it's a little wonky with quizzes versus tests. And, you should also get a clear picture of exactly what your child is getting time and a half for a separate location, what types of assignments they're getting for that. And then if something comes home, good or bad, kind of reach out and say, hey, was this done separate location or was this done in the classroom? We're really trying to monitor Johnny's progress, and how he's just to keep on top if we need to make any changes in the next IEP. But yeah, I think it's also good for parents to ask for specific assignments so sort of you can track it better, right? Instead of relying on, at the end of the IEP meeting and everybody's talking and throwing things at you, you're going to have a better idea of what's really been going on. All right. Is there next any more?
Yes, there's another one. Can you provide advice on using assistive technology or other tools to support my child's communication needs? What assistive technology is even available?
Oh, that is an excellent question. And there's so much. Assistive tech is basically anything that makes communication easier. And that could be, right, a pencil grip on a pencil is an assistive tech. We think of, devices and FM units and all of that stuff. But, assistive tech can be actually quite simplistic. So it really depends on what your child's needs are. So if your child needs assistive tech for communication in terms of like a device, it's really important to, check in with your teacher, make sure that they know that your child, one, has the device. I'm assuming they would, but also knows how to navigate it. And also, knows how proficient your child is. And really that sort of falls to the school speech pathologist if you're talking about like those big devices. But assistive tech could also be, speech to text. So if a child has difficulty writing, they may be able to use speech to text, and there are different programs for that. And the best way to get it, there are assistive tech evaluations that the DOE does do. Usually it's done, I believe, by a more centralized department, but you can request an assistive tech evaluation and they'll go through what your child's needs are, what exactly you're trying to get the tech for, and then make recommendations about what they think would be best based on your child's needs.
Okay, another question is how can I make sure the classroom environment supports my child's communication needs? I'm worried about too many distractions.
That whoever wrote that is a topic. It's one that we all want to know. I would say, again, talking to the teacher, listening to your child. Are they talking about like how it's hard for them to focus? Unfortunately, depending on what type of school, but if your child is in public school, these it's going to be hard to find a classroom without distractions, right? So what do you know about your kid and how can you support minimalizing those distractions? Is it a set of headphones, right? Is it even an FM unit that makes the teacher's voice louder and sort of muffles some of the background noise? Is it going to be a wiggly chair so that they're moving and better able to focus? I think it really will depend on, where like what your child finds most distracting. Is it noises? Is it movement? And once you've identified those, to then, collaborate with the teacher. This is where my child struggles. What can I do? What can I bring in? What can I do to support his ability to manage those distractions? Because I do not think you will find a classroom without any distractions. So it's sort of on us to teach our kids, well, we know this is distracting for you, and here are some strategies that we're going to do. And there might be things that the teachers can do in the environment, but I think it wouldn't be the right thing to ask us to change an entire environment just for one child, but see if there are ways that could benefit all kids, keeping the lights off at certain points, that kind of thing.
A lot of times,
Yeah.
even just sitting next to the teacher or sitting in the front of the classroom, as opposed to, depending on how the classroom is set up, as opposed to sitting in the back or, sometimes they're set up in tables. So making sure the child is
Mhm.
as close to the front of the room as opposed to like with their back turned to the teacher. A lot of times, even those small little changes can make a giant impact.
Mhm.
And certainly, like if there are specific friends that your child is easily distracted by, maybe you don't sit with them at the table and you have other times when your child can get together with them. So that can also help.
Yeah. And even the orientation of the desk, away from the window, away from the front door, like so they can't see the movement, can maybe help minimize some of that.
Yeah.
Okay, last question.
Mhm.
If I have concerns, am I entitled to meet with the teacher or special education teacher whenever I want? What if I think they need an accommodation that they don't already have?
Okay. So, entitled to meet with the teacher anytime you want. I mean, I think that's going to really depend heavily on the school, and how the school sets up. There are some schools that you have to go through like a liaison before you can even talk to the teacher. And there are some schools where you have direct access to the teacher. I don't, you probably have to set up a time to meet with them, but you can, and you are absolutely within your right to set up times that are outside of, say, curriculum nights and parent teacher conferences. You absolutely can do that. Again, it's going to be dependent on their schedules, and when they have a prep time, and, they're not obligated to speak to you outside of their contracted hours. So you might have to make yourself a little bit more available. But yeah, I mean, even on a personal note, like I've definitely had Zoom meetings with my son's teacher or with the sets provider, and some phone calls throughout the year. I usually try to check in, maybe once a quarter, twice a quarter. And sometimes the teachers will request, like this is a lot to talk about over an email. Let's hop on a Zoom. I think we can get it done faster. So yes, you can request a meeting at any time. If your child does not have an IEP and you think your child benefits from accommodations, there are a couple of things you can do. One, you can go through the evaluation process, which requires the school to evaluate all the areas that you have concerns in, and then an IEP can be created. There's also something called a 504 plan, which it's a yearly plan. And if you have outside documentation, say my child has ADHD and they need a separate location to take tests, that can be done on the 504 plan. And then it just has to be renewed every year. So there are a couple different avenues that you can go. It's going to depend on, are they not paying attention at all, or is it only in this one class? Is it just for writing? Will determine whether or not you should really go through the whole evaluation process or think about getting a 504 plan.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and we will be back the end of October, and we don't have a topic yet, but we will. So
But feel free
watch
to
for that.
suggest.
Yes, if you have topics that you want us to cover, please let us know. We are definitely open to suggestions. But we will have 2 more of these webinars this calendar year, one at the end of October and then one at the end of November. So we will look forward to seeing you back then.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.